Thank you all for coming. A little bit about myself. Let me get the clicker figured out. A little bit about me. I joined the Navy in 1998 for active duty, and I served for 10 years. After the Navy, I came here to Yavapai College kind of by accident. I originally came out here to go to Embry-Riddle, but for multiple reasons that did not work. So I found an alternative to get my education completed. I spent the time after that working through education, using my GI Bill benefits, and learning. And in the course of getting my education, I had the opportunity to be placed in leadership roles in classes multiple times. So a seed that was planted in the story I'm going to tell you is what led to my ultimate degree in leadership from Grand Canyon University. And in case you're curious, yes, that is my boot camp picture. Yes, that is me and my daughter at the time she was 4. On the day that I got promoted to first class petty officer, which is a non-commissioned officer rank in the Navy. And the ship there is the USS Iwo Jima LHD-7, which is a WASP class amphibious carrier. And that is where the story will be taking place. So a little bit about the Navy structure so that this will make some sense. At the time, in 2004, I was a second class petty officer. That's the 2 hash mark rank there. And a second class petty officer typically has the responsibilities of the day-to-day running of the shop, making sure the assignments get done. They're not the boss, they're an assistant supervisor. So I checked into this command and was learning how to be a supervisor for my job. I was a mechanic. I was an aircraft mechanic. Ironically, we did not have aircrafts on board, so we could not play with our job. So we did a lot of other shipboard related things. And I had not yet had the opportunity to have a leadership role. So that was my first leadership role. In middle 2004, we had a chief petty officer join our crew who turns out was not the best of people. He had a penchant for end running the leadership, if you will. We would call that a toxic leader in today's culture, the way he is or was and behaved. That unfortunately led to my first class petty officer and him very much disagreeing with each other. And in the Navy, you cannot quit. You don't have the right to say, I quit, I'm leaving. Doesn't work that way. So they butted heads. They were constantly fighting. And I mean fighting, where we could hear them out in the hangar bay fighting. It was very uncomfortable. Eventually, the first class petty officer, who was above me, so my supervisor, basically washed his hands of the situation because he had a specialty, so he went back to his specialty shop, and that's where he lived. That put his job on me. I was not yet trained for that. Neither did I have the rank for that. And the chief then put his attention to me. And he was end running my commands to my crew, my instructions, constantly. I did everything humanly possible within regulations to get this man to stop behaving the way he was. There's not a whole lot that you can do militarily when you're a low-ranking person, unfortunately. So I went to a different chief who sat in with me while I talked to this man, tried to bring up my concerns, and was summarily laughed at and told that he would do whatever he wanted to do. Unfortunately, that was not unusual, and it is not unusual in the military. Eventually, his behavior became so toxic that our crew, our shop, was investigated for mutiny. If you know anything about the military, if you know anything about the Navy, that is one of the most dangerous things to hear. Our higher-ups did understand that where the problem was. But they had to go through the process of investigating all of us, interviewing all of us by rank groups to hear what was happening. Even though I had been reporting to the higher ups going, this is a problem, please help me. It had gotten so bad that they were considering taking a court-martialable offense against the entire crew of our shop. It was very uncomfortable, as you can imagine, for a 24-year-old, 25-year-old in a second-class petty officer position who really should not have that position as a leading petty officer in the shop. I wasn't ready for it. I wasn't trained for it anyway. But I did the best that I could by my sailors. Shortly after that, we had the chief petty officer be moved. Again, it's very hard to get fired. It's very, very hard to get fired in the military. So the chief petty officer was moved to a directly under one of our most senior people in our division of the ship, so that he did not have direct interaction with lower ranking crew anymore. And a different chief petty officer came in. The good chief petty officer. The good chief petty officer changed my life. Okay. I learned what leadership should not look like with the bad chief petty officer. When the good chief petty officer came into our shop, he did something I had never, ever seen in the military. And I have a military family. Okay, so I grew up around it. And not to say that my uncles aren't good people, they were good leaders, but I've never seen someone come in and ask their service person, their junior personnel, how they can help you as an individual. He met with us by rank groups, because that's the proper thing to do. You don't have those conversations mixed in the ranks. And he actually asked us one-on-one, Petty Officer Beard, how can I help you? How can I help you get better? How can I help you develop? He actually took the time to recognize that I was dealing with a lot of personal problems. My child had some issues showing up. My ex-spouse was causing problems. There was just a lot of tension in my personal life going on. And it's not something I'd ever had asked before. How can I help you? I didn't understand why he was asking that. It didn't make sense. So it planted a seed, right? And as I went forward, one, I tried to emulate how he treated me to my junior sailors. I always tried to treat people well, but after that, throughout the rest of my Navy career, I took the time to ask how people were, how I can help them grow, what are their goals after the military or while they're in the military. I took the time to ask that because he taught me to do that, because no one else had done that before. So as I went forward in leaving the military in 2008 and trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life, as all transferring veterans coming back to civilian world have to do, I was faced with a conundrum of curiosity, if you will. I wanted to know what the heck he had done. And I had started to hear in some of the classes a couple of concepts like servant leadership, which this is nothing new. It's not a new concept. But the good chief petty officer took the time to enact it. I'm not sure if he was read up on it. He may have been. The chief's mess, which is think of it as the exclusive lounge of the chief petty officers, often had required reading lists and whatnot to help develop them. So I don't know if he had read up on those types of leadership techniques or not, but his authentic self, because he didn't try to go, I'm the chief petty officer, you will do what I say. He went, hey, let me help you get better. Did I get some things wrong? Yes. Did he coach me in it and make me better? Absolutely. And I took that forward. As a student worker, I had opportunities to work with other veterans, one of which is here helping me today. We transition each of us a little differently, coming back to civilian world. I knew I wanted to get my education. That was one of the things that I had a conversation with the chief. He actually encouraged me to do online schooling while I was on the ship, which was still kind of new, but just time framing of it, it didn't work very well for me to do it long term. And as I came into learning about servant leadership, a random psychology lecture here or community development class there where it was talked about, it started to click that this might be what that guy was doing. And so as I started learning about servant leadership and what it is, I found that there were some characteristics that set servant leadership apart. Listening, but not just listening to hear. Okay, listening to understand. If you're familiar with Stephen Covey, that's one of his you seek first to understand principles. Fits right into servant leadership. Empathy. The good chief took the time to understand that I was hurting. Not just because I was in a position that I shouldn't have been. I was hurting in my heart. He took the time to find out what was going on. Healing. I would not have wanted his job. Our shop was very, very broken. And he took the time to work it through and figure out how to fix it and make us a cohesive unit again. Taking the time to be aware of what's going on. These things, all leaders have to deal with conceptualization and with foresight and even to a certain extent stewardship, because you are in charge, you are entrusted with your followers when you are a leader. A servant leader takes that a little bit forward. It's not just stewarding the fact that they have followers, it's stewarding the individuals. I didn't understand that at the time. I did not understand what he was doing in trying to heal us and make us better and make us functional again. But I learned later that all of these traits is exactly what he was showing us, along with how to do counseling and stuff for the things I needed to learn to be the right level of leader that I was thrust into. Building community is another big one of servant leadership. So with servant leaders, they're not just looking to how they can better themselves in the leadership world. They're looking to go, how can I help create the community that then will go forth and build what we want to do as a group and lead through that. Those were the things I was exposed to and didn't understand in 2005 when the chief was replaced with the bad chief was replaced with the good chief. But it stuck with me. It never went away. And because it never went away, it drove the way I behaved around other people. And as I've had the privilege of working with students as an advisor here and leading them, now as an adjunct professor, getting to lead some of them, it's a blessing to have that experience because I can then go forward and say, okay, here is how I was treated and how I would want to treat you, how I can help you. Let me help you grow. It developed me in a way I never expected possible. Let me get those up. So there are actually some definitions of servant leadership. If you have ever heard of Robert Greenleaf, he kind of put it all in a book a couple of decades ago. And it's more about the people that you are leading than the leader. It comes down to wanting and having a drive to serve the people that you are leading and not just leading them somewhere along the way. And so my growth started. It started with a seed being planted when I was very, very broken. The good chief petty officer was the one who did not make a fuss about me needing to leave the ship for medical purposes. He did not cause a fight with processes and whatnot when other people did on the ship at the time that I had to leave. He showed me compassion and caring that to this day, I always feel. I have some memory problems from my military time. I do not remember this man's name. He is simply the chief in my memory. I remember the bad people who shall remain nameless, but I cannot remember the man's name. I can remember his face, can't remember his name, but he had such an impact on me that it came forward as I went through schooling. That picture is my graduation day from Grand Canyon. My mom passed away a couple months before that. Excuse me. My mother was in one of the earlier pictures. On board that ship, where both the good and the bad petty officers were in my lives at that point. Excuse me. Thank you, my friend. You're doing great. Pardon me. Yeah. My dad was able to be there for that. And he was very proud of me. And I know that he is very proud of me. Because I'm the first one of his children to go that far in education. I'm not the first in our family to have a college degree, but I am one of the first to get into this type of level of degree in our family. And it would not have happened. It wouldn't without the good chief petty officer. It just wouldn't have. Because he chose to eat last. He chose to put military requirements aside. And he chose to put us first as people, not just as sailors who had a job to do. He changed my life by doing that. I did not have a comfortable remainder of my career. I had ups and downs. I was dealing with a lot of personal pain and struggle. That did reflect in my career. It's part of why I did not continue to retirement. However, without him taking the time to do that, to learn and help us, I would not be here. I would not be standing here. I would not have the degree that I worked very hard for. The kid's much bigger now, by the way. And I wouldn't be able to help other people the way that I do. And I love helping other people. So if he's ever going to see this, thank you, Chief Petty Officer. This sailor appreciates you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Does anyone have any questions for Carol? Because I have a question. Yeah. When you were doing your degree program, we all know it contains a ton of reading. Yes. Was there a particular author that you read that impacted you as much as this chief did?
Stephen Covey.
Oh, here. I'm sorry, I turned off. That was me.
Probably Stephen Covey as far as approach for leading others and just engaging with people. Robert Greenleaf for the definitions and learning that, hey, there was an actual concept behind what I was trying to figure out what this thing was. Because it was so weird. It was so alien to the military aspect of what we did that I'd never experienced it. Those are the two, well-known authors that come to mind more recently after graduating. Because while I am a lifelong learner, so I have a library in my house.
Yay.
So I like to read Simon Sinek. I resonate very strongly with his writing. Yes, the title of my piece was shamelessly stolen from him. But I'm not a snob as far as the authors, if the content makes sense and is good. So there's many.
So if people are interested in learning the deeper levels of servant leadership, where would you tell them to start?
It does depend on the individual. If they are a little bit more interested in the military stories aspect and meshing it into civilian sector, that would definitely be Simon Sinek. He spends a lot of time interviewing military personnel, friends that he knows, and pulling their stories into real business world examples of leadership. If you're looking for more of a textbook variation, it's going to be Peter Northouse. His books on leadership are amazing, very easy to read. The concepts are easily explained. And Stephen Covey.
And Stephen Covey. Very
You
good.
can't go wrong with Stephen
Do
Covey.
you have a question? Oh, Adaremi has a question.
There you go.
Thank you for telling your stories. The uneven path you went through has definitely increased your emotional intelligence. Today, based on where you are, if you go through the same process, the same uneven path, what will you do differently?
If I knew what I know now?
Yeah.
Oh gosh. As a 40-something-year-old woman who has lived quite a bit more life, I probably would have gone higher up in our department and made complaints formally first, before allowing things to get to the point that they did. Emotionally, I'm not sure that there would have been much different. I'm much more likely to yell at people now than I was then. Part of that's the difference between being in my 20s and being in my 40s, and being more self-confident than I was then. I really was dealing with a lot of personal issues at the time that put me in an unhealthy situation where I couldn't control my emotions very well, and I couldn't manage the extra bombardment that was going on at the time. Military bearing was a non-entity for me for about 3 years as I finished my career, because I just couldn't control my face. Now I'm not in the military, so it's not quite as much of a problem when my face decides to do what it did today. So maybe going higher up. Unfortunately, the command culture at the time was aware of the problem, and they knew, the higher ups knew that there was an issue in our shop, and they didn't take their actions either. So they didn't protect their sailors, and the consequence was we were investigated for mutiny. So I don't know what else I could have done at the time, because I did everything I was able to do that I knew how to do.
Oh, we have another question.
Mhm.
Looking back now, do you think that the higher ups dealt with it properly as far as like saying you guys were going to get charged with mutiny? Or do you think that they took the authoritative route instead of the servant route?
I think the chief's mess failed. So in the military, you take care of your own rank. The discipline often is done at your own rank level, especially when you get into the senior non-commissioned officer ranks, which are the chief petty officer ranks. The junior people do not speak up and do corrective actions. It is handled amongst themselves. And the chief's mess failed. The ship was very, very well aware of the situation. You couldn't walk past our shop any given day without hearing that first class petty officer and that chief screaming at each other. And unfortunately, through thick steel doors. It was that bad. So do I think that they took the right route? Oh, I think they should have handled their business inside the chief's mess and gotten him corrected. They did not. Consequences was the officers had to take over. They did what they needed to do. We were exonerated, by the way. None of us were charged with mutiny. We were just investigated.
Oh, I have another question here.
So what would you say is the top aspect of servant leadership in your opinion?
Aspect in what sense?
Like, what is the number one thing that is shown by a servant leader?
Compassion and empathy. Right after that is listening to understand. You cannot have servant leadership without those things. You can have leadership and they can be very good leaders, but without compassion, empathy, and true listening, they will not lead as a servant leader. Yes, sir.
There's a gray area of leadership in which most organizations fail to recognize. As the individual deal with you, you are unique on your own. There are some attributes of servant leadership that could have been intentionally and personally applied to you. That individual doesn't know you before. It's a learning process and learning curve for that commander to take his time to learn what will be peculiar to you.
Mm-hmm.
Those processes can take time.
Yes.
That commander might be clueless that time.
Mm-hmm.
Most organizations don't pay attention to that. And
True.
that is where part of the leadership crisis arises.
True.
Sorry, I just have to say this because
No, please.
it's what is common in most organizations that leaders don't deal with the follower
Mm-hmm.
at various levels. They just put everyone in the box. And that doesn't fit for leading the first group of followers nowadays. I just want to highlight that.
Thank you. Thank you. Do we have any more questions? Oh, here we go.
So Carol, I'm curious if you remember what your chief did to support your self-awareness when you first got to know each other, and then as time progressed, how did he support that?
So I was going through a lot of medical screenings for the health problems that I was dealing with. And I was dealing with a child who was beginning to present special needs at her daycare. And instead of making it more difficult for me to go and do those things, occasionally, if he needed to, he would walk me off the ship so nobody would make a fuss. Okay. Even I got called one time for my daughter during an all hands required on board evolution. We were doing a training. And I should not have been allowed to leave, but I'm a single parent. So he walked me off so that I would not have any trouble. He became a shield to me, for me, in a way that he didn't have to. He chose to. He took the scornful looks and the chiving and all of the poking, so I didn't have to. So I could go take care of things, which is not common in the military. I know I have one or two military veterans there, and it's not normal for them to do that in that way. So I didn't, at the time, I knew I was going to go to college and whatnot. I wasn't ready to separate. I was nowhere near the end of my contract. He brought forth ideas about how to maybe get me transferred to the reserves, to the active reserves, the training units, things like that. It wasn't going to work in the time period that we were talking about. But he explored ideas, and he worked with me to help me get where I needed to be. And then when medical chose that, they said, okay, it's time to get her off the ship for her own health. Instead of what the rest of the shop and the rest of the department was doing, which was basically making it near impossible for me to leave, he broke down the barriers. He got my paperwork. In fact, the last time I saw him was actually the day before the USS Iwo Jima left for their cruise in 2006. He was also leaving because he was being retired. And he went with me. I had avoided that place for almost 6 months at that point. He went back with me because I needed some paperwork that they had refused to give me. He went with me and he grabbed it out of the people's hands and gave it to me. He made sure I got what I needed. He didn't have to. He chose to. You have follow-up? More questions?
So is there any way to search and find this man?
I have a couple of friends from the Iwo Jima that I could ask that might remember. Are there ways to do it? I'm sure there are, but it would require getting crew manifest from the Navy for 2004, 2005, and 2006, which I'm not, no, not easily.
We have another
I see
question.
that.
Some of those Navy records are online. Because
Some
I
of-
did look up my dad. He
Mhm.
served in the Navy many, many years ago, and I don't know when they release them.
Yeah.
But there is a manifest with the names linked to that ship. Just,
Yeah.
I don't know if yours is too recent or not.
I don't know. I know about that database. It's just, without remembering exactly what his name was, I know what his rank was. I know what his job was. So I know what his title was, but there were like 5 of those rank and title. So,
Hi, Carol.
hi.
So my question is, so many times in the leadership structure, there is activities that our senior management doesn't follow through with, they don't act upon, they're notified, doesn't happen. Yet I've found that servant leadership is still very, very effective, even if you don't have upper management support. So in your position, was there things that you might go back and recommend to your earlier self to say, here's how you could have helped the sellers maybe more under you, maybe manage a little bit more the other things, or at least endure better?
I'm not sure that there is, because I was already doing those things unconsciously.
Right.
When you're the only female in the shop and you have a child, you tend to become mom. So that those behaviors were happening. I was doing what I could to get
Right.
them taken care of, making sure they were getting what they needed, and becoming a shield for them. The problem was there was too much coming down with the bad chief, and he was end running around me and giving countermanding orders. There was not much I can do when I'm not there to correct it.
Right. No, I just wondered, knowing you well, I know how you would have applied most things. And I just wondered if there were things you'd learned now that you went, oh, gee, right there, I could have used that one thing.
Probably. It probably is. It's finding that fulcrum point,
Right.
right? The shatter point. Figuring out what the actual point of problem where it could have been countermanded, where it could have been balanced out. If I had been on a more stable footing, as an individual at the time, I may have been able to recognize, you know, with what I know now, those points and been a little bit more effective. I do not believe it would have changed the bad chief's behavior
I get
or
that.
the end result of it. I think I might have managed not to have quite as many health problems if I had noticed it at the time, but
Right.
that's why they call it hindsight.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for your service. We do appreciate it.
I probably don't need the mic. It's for the video camera. There you go.
Are there parts of who you are now and what you do now that you are able and willing to share with us right now for the students here? It's on Yavapai College campus, right?
Mhm.
That you work?
Yes, ma'am. So I am an academic advisor and success coach in our Student Support Services TRIO program. And I am, as of this semester, a new adjunct professor in the business department teaching leadership. What I did in the Navy definitely contributes to what I do now. I always appreciated and wanted to help people grow and become better. And if I hadn't have gone through the things that I did, even though they were very hard, I would not have be nearly as compassionate or empathetic and able to help students where they're at as I am now. And I hope that with my studying and my learning and my understanding of what all those leadership bits and pieces are now, that I become a good professor, but we're still learning on that one. So.
Any other questions? Please help me by thanking Carol for her amazing talk today.